Yeah, I think it's recording. All right.
Okay.
How much did you read? How many chapters did you read?
I read till exactly page 70.
Okay. I don't know how many chapters that is. I thought I was like, I don't know how many chapters he has read. So let me just read like three
Yeah.
chapters. So I woke up early in the morning today because
Okay.
I tend to do things a little last minute. So I was like, shit, that thing is today, which is exactly why I do this. Because
Yeah.
if we didn't have this, no, I would have read it. So I've read three chapters, right?
Hmm.
So do you want to start
And the
with?
introduction as well, right? The prologue, like that little
Yeah.
introduction by Deepak Chopra.
Oh, I didn't read that. No, no, I'm not
Oh,
reading that.
okay. That was also quite fascinating because he kind of, although he summarized the book, he made comparisons to Gandhiji's ahimsa, basically, which
Ah.
was quite a stark way to start the book, and it really set the tone for me for what was going to come later.
Yeah, I think that was really interesting for me because even later in the book, even Rosenberg himself, he does sort of there's a nod to or an acknowledgement of this having come from. He's saying that there's nothing new about this. It's not like anything that I have come up with. It's this sort of
Yeah.
centuries we've always had this knowledge for centuries now. And he also talks about J. Krishnamurti, which I think is also sort of a Buddhist slash Advaita philosopher. So yeah, like even Rosenberg himself sort of mentions that. So what was your first impression of sort of the tone of the book?
Actually, my first impression was okay. Uh, Rosenberg, like he's talking about is nonviolent communication, which is supposed to be a helpful form of communication. But the first question that arises in my mind is practicality. Like I might learn these steps,
Yeah,
but it requires a certain level of awareness. It requires a certain level of not just awareness, like okay, I'm meditating, which is much more simple than actually talking to someone and putting these principles into action. So that is where I thought, okay, I will have to really work hard on being aware of what I'm speaking and how I'm thinking even before I speak. Um, because because the conditioning is so deep. I think he mentions it there as well that like our history and our history creates our reality, and this is what causes us to judge people, blame people, which is eventually forms of violence. And it's these forms of violence that have anchored our identity. So how do we make that change in the system?
yeah, that was really interesting to me because the idea that sort of we've because we've always as people and as a society we've not been particularly conscious of what we're saying and what effect it is having on people. The language that we speak is not accommodated to sort of have that spirit of communication. And so, like, if you want to incorporate that spirit of communication, you have to go out of your way because that is not how people usually talk. So that was really interesting to me. But I mean, another thing that when I sort of started reading it was, I think I always carry a certain amount of skepticism uh, when I encounter something. I was like, oh, this is another one of those self-helpy books, uh, which is okay. But I feel like they're often saying things that could be said in like one or two pages, or maybe they could have been an essay, but they end up making a
Yeah.
book out of it. But as I read it, I think every chapter is sort of giving value. I don't feel like it's that sort of uh, an essay masquerading as a book, so to speak.
Yeah, I guess in the beginning there's this sort of a level of trust that the author has to build with his reader, and that level of trust, obviously, it's going to take some time. But at the same time, even most self-help books I've read, they seem to they do seem to build that level of trust to an extent.
Yeah.
but I feel that this one does it much better just
Yeah.
because he's really building on his core ideas as the first seven, like at least these first 70 pages so far.
Okay.
Like he's really taking it step by step building, which I feel a little too speedy uh for me, because it's a lot to take in
Yeah.
and a lot to digest really.
Hmm.
You can eat a big meal, but then you have to kind of give your stomach some rest,
Yeah.
and otherwise it's going to be all sorts of problems,
Yeah.
so I think that digestive time for his words, I wish there was some more time. I wish he had expanded on some of, like, overall I'm talking about some of the aspects with a little bit more. I like the touch that he gives this little story at the end of each chapter,
Yeah.
where he kind of
Like a
relates
case
one of
study
his
of what. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, like one of his patients, or it's not just him. It's also these other people, and that makes it more real. It makes me feel okay. Oh, I'm not alone, which is what. Yeah, I feel that um, I'm when I'm reading a book, it's often just me reading it and these imaginary characters in my head.
Okay.
It's like yeah, it's just these. It's like this author, this imaginary author who has written this book, and then
Okay.
to make that relatable requires this a certain sort of honesty from the author's side, which I find he's giving. Yeah,
Interesting. I feel like I enjoy that sort of fast pace. Like, okay, just keep giving it. Just don't sort of stay with it. Okay, I get the point. Move on to the next one. So I feel like the exact opposite of you, because I'm like, yes, this is good for me. I love this. But yeah,
I
okay.
have another friend who's exactly like this. He
Okay.
he he devours information, like, and like and he's all about efficiency, like even in his daily life. Everything is about planning, efficiency, and it's
No,
just
no,
fantastic
I
because
see.
there's
I
so
see
much
your
I
point.
can learn.
No, I see your point that you have to take a point, then you have to stay with it, and you have to let it sort of marinate for it to be driven home. But I prefer to do it like maybe I would read that page slowly, and I would like sort of spend some time thinking about it while I'm reading it, as opposed to sort of the author driving, giving me more. But I suppose, yeah,
Letting it
I see.
stew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I loved this. Let me just quote. So from the beginning of the book, he says, "What happens to disconnect us from our compassionate nature, leading us to behave violently and exploitatively? Conversely, what allows some people to stay connected to their compassionate nature under even the most trying circumstances?" And so this is sort of the mood that he's setting for the book. That this is the sort of the thesis. This is the question that I'm trying to explore in the book, and I feel like he's doing a very good job of it. And it's a very, it sort of it pulls you in. It creates an intrigue of, okay, this, it sounds like a quite a sell, and how is he going to deliver on it? So you read this and you're hooked. That, okay, what how do you do that? What if this is the question that he set out with? What is the answer? What research has he done on it? And then he talks about this lady who I shared this screenshot with you this morning, the Holocaust survivor. And I shared it, I was reading it, and I was like, bloody hell, what is this? And I shared it with so many of my friends, and everyone was like, this, I can't do this. Like, I could never have done this. So this lady who during Holocaust, when she was you know mistreated, for the lack of a better word, by a Nazi soldier, she, instead of thinking, oh, he's such a terrible person, he's mistreating me, her thought, what she wrote in her diary, what she was never expecting anyone to read, her thought was, okay, this person, what place of hurt is he coming from, that he's treating me this way? Okay, what are his insecurities? What are his sort of negative experiences that are leading him to behave this way? Which is which blows my mind. Why were you thinking like that when you're in a Nazi concentration camp? I mean, that is
Wow.
craziness, man, right?
Yeah, she probably has this amazing ability to just dice to first of all separate herself from the situation, and then go to the other side and really empathize. When I read that, it reminded me of A Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl.
Acha.
If you've read that,
I haven't. Let me just
it's
note it down.
it's
What's it
it's
called? A
it's about
man's.
man's search for meaning. It's also about um, a doctor who gets caught in the concentration camp, and it's all just really about how he's witnessing the degradation of humanity, how
Hmm.
he's coping with having to be a part of this environment, and losing losing that sense of him that um, that has hope in a future, losing that sense, but still fighting for it.
So he's a he's
It's a
a he,
beautiful book.
he's a victim. So he's caught in the camp, or is he a German Nazi?
He's caught in the camp.
He's caught in. Okay, okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
um, and he's also a doctor. He's a psychologist, a psychotherapist. um, yeah, so his perspective is, again, it reminded me of that, very similar.
Yeah,
uh, and like you said earlier, the disconnection that we feel, I feel that Rosenberg touches upon it here, because he mentions two things. I think he mentions this example of of a black man and of a name. um, the sense of uh, color and the
oh yeah,
sense
that
of
he got
sound.
he got beaten up because of his own name. So when he went to school, or said, "Oh,
Yeah,
you're a Jew or something," because his name is
some
Rosenberg.
yeah, it was like a kite, something like a kite thing,
Kaik, they called him
like
a kaik. That's
kike.
a
Right, right,
derogatory term for a Jewish man, I think, or it was used
right, right.
at that time. And so
I remember it as kite for some reason.
no, I think it was a kaik, K-I-K, and I think that's a
Okay,
derogatory term for a Jewish person, or it used to be at
right.
least in that time when he was growing up. And so he got beaten up by people in his school for being Jewish, and that sort of, I think, really drove home the point for him when it came to race relations, that people can be mistreated in a very, just a kid can be beaten up just for being Jewish. But coming back to this one, another thing that I sort of saw that really sort of caught me is when he talks about giving. He says, when we give from the heart, we do so out of a joy that springs forth whenever we willingly enrich another person's life. And then he talks about this whole idea of giving. There's this whole song about, okay, I'm giving you, and you are giving me the gift of being able to give and the joy that comes from giving. So thank you for giving me that. And that really struck me because when we sort of, I think consciously or maybe otherwise, mostly otherwise, when we create this idea of, okay, what decisions should I make, whether I should do this or that, and this has, all these pros and cons, and this has all these pros and cons. And when something involves giving, then maybe we associate a cost with that, because, oh, when I'm giving, I'm losing something, but maybe, okay, in the future it will give me some return. But here he talks of the act of giving itself not has value to you, not because it will fetch you some future return, or people will treat you nicely, or because you will have certain prestige, or people will think of you as a very generous person, but just the act of giving itself has value. And that was very interesting to me, just to see that being put in because it is true. Like, you could demonstrate that, when, like, you could hook someone up to, like, sensors in their brain waves and their sort of biochemicals, and you could see that it is actually true when you give. So it's not just, all up in the air. It is verifiably true, but it is not a part of your sort of internal narrative. And that's why it was really interesting to me.
How do you define? How would you define between? Okay, so you have two decisions, and you've got the pros and cons of each. Now, how do you decide which one is actually more generous? Which decision is actually the more generous one?
Can you give me an
And
example? This is too abstract for me.
just think about the two decisions that you were thinking about when you said you made, like, there were two decisions and you made the pros and cons.
Mhm. So
Um,
maybe just, for example, if I'm if I have to finish, I have to say I'm a student, I have to submit an assignment. I could do that and go to sleep, or I could help out another fellow student of mine because they're struggling with that, and I could think, oh, I could help them out, and then my own mathematics could be, oh, maybe if I need help in the future, then they would also help me out, and that could be one of the things. Or I could think, oh, maybe I could help them, but you know what, they never help me back. But so the part of the mathematics here is, okay, what do I have? What's in it for me, right? So I could
yeah,
help them and sort of sacrifice a few hours of my sleep, maybe. Or I could choose to not help them and go to sleep and feel better because I mean, in college, sleep is a rare commodity. So in this situation, when there's some internal mathematics happening, the idea that uh, there is some value to be assorted to just the idea that to just the act of giving
do,
is insightful here, which is not a default um, part of our internal narrative, whereas it aligns with reality, but it's not what how we think. That's what I meant.
yeah, that does remind me of game theory, of this book called The Strategy of Something, whatever. And and how we tend to negotiate every relationship in our life. Now, that itself, I believe that's the first, that's an obstacle. I don't like, um I think those are limitations that we are setting on our own selves, that I have to behave and act in a way that at some level has to benefit me.
Or is
uh,
maximizing what I can get out of it for me. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
exactly. um but at the same time, we cannot function for any other benefit than our own identity, because this identity is all that we can see. We cannot see from any eyes other than our own.
Yeah,
We cannot speak from any mouth other than our own.
yeah.
But then the question then arises, who is this identity? And in fact, um, talking about sleepless nights, I had a sleepless night last night because I was attending the initiation I told you about.
Okay,
It
yeah.
was last night.
Oh,
And
that's
the
it.
initiation was for a deity called Vajrapani.
Mhm.
um, Vajrapani is a wrathful deity.
Uh-huh.
The deity is wrathful. He holds a vajra in his right hand, a diamond, indestructible thunderbolt with five golden prongs, and in his other hand he has the demon subduing gesture,
Mhm.
which holds a lasso. Now, this deity, at first sight, you'll see the human heads, the severed human heads around his neck.
Mhm.
You'll see the crown of five skulls.
Okay.
And when you visualize this, the first thing we feel is fear, because um, it's frightening to be able to visualize this very, very succinctly, or even just look at a picture of it
Mhm.
and keep focusing on it, because you realize this is in you. When you're visualizing this fearsome, wrathful form,
Yeah.
So I think the first part is to accept that the demons within us. When we accept our own demons, that there are these parts of us, that's when we can begin to show them compassion. And just telling the demon within you, okay, it's cool, that that you want all these things in this world,
Mm.
but I'm not going to harm anyone in any way to satisfy that. All I'm going to do is I'm going to convert you. I'm going to make this demon into a bodhisattva. I'm going to make this demon into a deity. I'm going to make the same demon work for the good of millions and millions of people, you know, trillions of people of the past, the present, and the future. My one action now, my one sentence now can affect the future in innumerable amount of ways that I cannot conceive.
Mm.
Chaos theory. We don't know what the ultimate end result of action is. So I like to think of it, and Rosenberg then gives a great example of finding the keys. Um, so he's lost the keys to his car, and there's a light that's
Yeah,
shining near the car, and there's a darkness there. That's where the key is. But
yeah.
he's searching for it only in the light,
Because the lights.
you know? But we have to go to the darkness.
Yeah,
We
you
have
have
to
to
go to
go
the
where the key
darkness.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
The key is often hidden, it's in the darkness.
Mm-hmm. That point that you raised there, specifically about you observing something and you know fear arising in you, and then realizing, oh, maybe someone else could see that and not have fear arise in them. So maybe fear is not coming just from a function of that thing, but maybe from what's within me also, which is
Yes,
I
your inner
mean,
demons.
exactly. So like tying it to sort of the four components of the non-violent communication framework that Rosenberg talks about. So he says that first is you observe without judging or evaluating, right? So you observe what is there. So with the example that he gave, so you would observe that there is a demon. You would observe that it has, severed human heads, and then you state how you feel, right? Then you state, okay, I'm feeling fear. But it's very important not to conflate the two or not to merge the two. Not to think, oh, this is causing this or that is fearful. You can say that, oh, I'm looking at it and this is what I'm feeling, as opposed, and which is not the same as saying, oh, this is a fearful thing. So it is very important to draw a distinction between, okay, I'm observing this and I'm feeling this, as opposed to, oh, this is what is making me feel it, which is sort of the crux of the whole non-violent communication framework, is to not confuse observation with evaluation, or evaluation. So not so you take evaluation and we think that it is just observation. We think that it is just how we how
Banu,
reality
I think
is.
I think Banu, I think your voice is cracking a bit.
This is better.
One sec. No, I think it's the network. Like it's showing me red bars of like on your name.
Is it
So
mine
I
or
think
yours?
if I think you'll just repeat that, then you can cut this.
Sure.
Just
So
check what's mine showing.
I don't know how to check what the network.
And I think yeah, if you could repeat through properly in the
All right, sure.
recording.
So yeah, I was saying that um, yeah, it's important to take an evaluation, which is okay. It's okay to be subjective. It's okay to have biases or feelings towards somebody, but also or something, but also acknowledge that that is what it is. It is an evaluation. It is not how things really are. It is how you feel about them, which is two different things.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
So you're separating like we like you said, we tend to mix things up as human beings, and that separation can only come when we have a clear picture of who we are and what we are feeling and whether we are actually feeling anything in the first place. Um, and and we are feeling something, but that's what the practice of prana paramita, which you've studied, is also about. And recognizing the emptiness of these feelings. So in essence, all that's there is is this objective point of view that allows us to benefit other people as much as possible without bringing our own notions of what they are trying to say or what they are in the picture.
Mhm.
um, and and then yeah, developing that stick. He talked about because we are children of often we are often children, and children always have greater and greater needs. We have greater and greater requests from our mothers, and our parents.
Hold on,
um,
I think my Wi-Fi is
but
acting up.
I
Let me
think
switch to. I'll create a
okay,
mobile hotspot. Let me switch to that because my.
okay.
Just give me one. I hope so. My Wi-Fi is usually okay, but it can get spotty at times. This should be better. Is this better?
Yes, it's showing 4 white bars,
Perfect.
and 4 white bars is supposed to be better. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah, we
yeah.
tend to connect ourselves to everything, right? We tend to just make everything so personal, and and that's what the child in us does.
Yeah.
Hey, I like that thing. It's mine now. And then when it's far away from you, you can't get it. Hey, can you get that for me?
Yeah.
And and then and because again, all we think that we always need help from the outside world.
That is so interesting when you
um
raise that point because he was also talking at this some point. He was talking about judging, making. I mean, I'll come to moralistic versus value judgments later, but this one point he feels says that judgment is a function of what our needs are, and also a function of our frame of reference, which remind me oddly of this conversation I had with a friend of mine, and she would look at someone and say, "Oh, their accent is really oh they have such a terrible accent. They don't speak in like what kind of an accent is that?" And they would look at someone else and say, "Oh, that is they sound like such a." Are you there, Aman? Your video is stuck, so I can't see anything. Oh, mine stuck? Or
oh yeah, you're back now.
perfect. So yeah, so my friend would look at somebody's accent and think, oh, they have such a terrible accent. Like, oh, they're completely mispronouncing words. And they would look at someone else's accent and say, oh my God, he's such a snob and he's so pretentious and he talks in such a highbrow accent, right? And so the idea is, and I've seen it in so many people, the idea is the accent that I have is the appropriate accent, and anything sort of less sort of particular is to is not a good enough accent, and anything more particular than that is too pretentious and snobbish, and mine is the only correct one. And that was so I've seen that so with so many people. Uh,
I think if they
um,
just put 2 words in the end, if they put 2 words in the end for me, that's it. That's all they need to do.
yeah, exactly,
So
right. This is too
yeah,
much for me. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's it's we don't realize. So he gives the example that someone says, "Oh, that guy is he's so lazy or he's so whatever. When someone else could look at the same person and say, oh, he's uh, carefree, and or maybe he's tired, which is also like an evaluation. So what we're not seeing is that we're making observations, but then when we're describing, we are adding we are or adding our own evaluation of how what we think is the appropriate thing, what we think, how we think things should be, and then are making judgments based around our own frames of reference.
Yeah,
And I
and
suppose that
and
is,
these value systems, I think it's great to use these value systems as education has taught us to make reference points to other things, because then it's not just, hey, it's me saying this, but it's also about, okay, this is an objective point of view because it has been discussed with many people, and many people have experts, you could say. When I was in university, we'd write dissertations, and it was the most annoying thing for me. I just used to love, like, just writing what I thought
yeah, yeah,
about
as
whatever
opposed to
cinema
coding.
exhibition.
Sure.
Like, that's what my dissertation was about, cinema exhibition. So independent cinema versus sort of
Studio cinema, sure.
yeah, commercial cinema and bourgeois. How does a bourgeois function in that? So I was always just putting my thoughts on the page, and later finding references to suit my perspective. You
Ah,
know,
like
I
that.
found
So
myself doing that,
instead of
and then a teacher pointed out to me. She's like, you should just read as much as you can, just go through whatever you want to learn as much as you can,
yeah.
and then when you write it, you can always trace it back to this thing. You can always trace it back. So that habit is something that, um, it's beautiful. I mean, I'm glad to have cultivated it.
So instead of what you were doing was instead of reading up and on everything and then forming conclusions, you were starting with a conclusion and then looking for arguments that support it. Yeah, yeah, interesting. But yeah,
So
so sort of going back to this, something I wanted to get your thoughts on. So this sort of completing the four components was, so you observe what someone is saying or doing, and then you see how that is making you feel. What is your, what are the feelings that arise? Are you feeling hurt by it? Are you feeling joyful about it? Are you feeling confused, angry, whatever? And then you try to look within and see what needs of yours are connected to those feelings. Like, what is it that you need that is not being fulfilled, that is making you feel hurt or angry or whatever? And then you frame that uh, to the person. It's just this sort of the gist of the. So, for example, if you say, "Oh, Bhanu, you're looking really ugly," I would say, "Amma, dude, that's making me feel like shit, man. Don't say that. Instead, just yeah, whenever you say that, it makes me feel terrible. So just don't say that, right?" Now, I have from multiple people who have used similar techniques, not this one, but in the realm of this technique, and sort of in the neighborhood of it. They have used it in their relationships with maybe family members or in a romantic setting. And they've received the feedback, stop talking to me like a therapist. That's so annoying. You're always talking to me like a therapist. What do you feel
he
about that?
mentions that as well, right?
So yeah, he's so I don't think so. Not, I mean, I've read only three chapters, so I don't know how far in you are.
He does mention that for sure.
Does he?
Yeah,
No, so
at
he
some
does
point,
say
maybe not in
that
the first three chapters.
maybe. So maybe I'm not there yet, but I feel like that happens a lot. And so the other day, I think we were saw this talk that we both attended. She
Yeah.
said that even if you're trying to communicate with someone and they're angry and you are all relaxed and calm, it can make them feel even worse that, oh, I'm all angry. And if I'm angry and you're not angry, then I come across as a maniac. And we're like, oh, you are, I'm angry and you're giving me, you're so calm and smiling. I want to punch you in the face. Right. So in that moment, the kinder thing to do is to reciprocate that sort of aggressive energy, not coming from a place, not feeling that anger, but
Yeah.
sort of out of kindness, going to that level of energy with them and sort of bringing them, out of it. So if you're saying something angry, so I could say, yes, I hear you. So you're saying, yeah, I hear you. Because if I'm just like, yeah, I hear you, and like you think, oh, I am being so angry, and are you trying to mock me? Why are you not angry also? Do you see what I mean?
I do see what you mean. I
Yeah.
think I think though that when this emotion is coming in front of me, when someone is screaming at me or angry at me, the first thing, and if I do not respond in their tone, I'd like to look within and see why is this anger not affecting me? Why is this anger not hurting me?
Mhm.
Why do I feel that this person is completely actually empty of his anger? In the reality of it, his anger does not exist. So I look within and see if I can find that seed of anger, and it's there in everyone. So when I do find it, all I need to do is I think love, because if I were to bloom that seed into a flower, into a red bloody flower, and 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 if I were to bloom that seed into a flower that's poisonous, I will be not only I will be killing myself first, obviously,
Yeah.
but definitely the other person,
Oh, no, no, I'm
even.
not saying you should reciprocate with anger. For sure not. I'm saying you're using this, you're being calm, but while you're being calm, it can piss the other person off, thinking, oh, oh, I am angry and why is this person not angry? You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I think even if you were acting, even actors, they do the same thing. They do, even if they're not, even if it's all fake, they tend to build on a real seed of anger within them, and they let that
Uh,
seed become. And when you go totally into that, you can go insane. You can become a drug addict. You can die, like like literally, like that is the
uh,
path that
so you're
goes to.
saying that even if you're acting angry, that can affect how you're feeling inside. That's tricky.
There's a reality in every lie. There's a truth in every lie.
That's tricky. Tricky, tricky, tricky.
It is.
Interesting.
But
Okay,
it works
another
both
point.
ways.
Yeah.
It works both ways because even if a person is generally a very angry person,
Yeah.
okay, generally he's person is very angry.
Mm.
If he acts peaceful, if he acts loving and kind and generous and compassionate, and he
You
actually
start
really
to feel it
connects with his
inside.
partner, he's building that seed.
Yeah.
So that's a beautiful thing. That means
Yeah.
there's so much hope.
Yeah. Goes both ways. True.
It goes both ways. And I think as humans we tend to love. Our natural thing is love. We since we're born,
Hmm.
um, and and that is the feeling that we have been given the opportunity to cultivate in this birth. Yeah.
Okay. So the next point that really stood out to me was, so just to give background, he's Rosenberg is, like we said, he's Jewish, and so he has been to Israel, and he has used these techniques of nonviolent communication in the context of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And he is actually talking to these sort of Palestinian men who have had tear gas thrown in them, and which have made in USA written on them, and they can see that clearly he's an American guy, he's a Jewish guy, and they screaming at him, oh, he's a murderer, he's an assassin, get lost, things like that. He ends up converting that into a civil conversation. He ends up having a Ramadan meal with one of the men who was hurling abuses at him. So this made me think, how does one end up doing that? How does one even create a space with the ground rules for such a conversation, right? So there's like when people hate each other and there's a lot of vitriol, conversations can it's instead of people talking to each other, it ends up being people talking at each other or shouting at each other. And so how do you even sort of create a space for the framework to be implemented? That is something that sort of I
I
was
think
thinking.
the guy who was there in that conference of his, and who stood up and shouted, "It's because of few Americans," or whatever he actually said. He accused Rosenberg, but at the same time, that was the most compassionate thing he did for Rosenberg, because it allowed Rosenberg the opportunity to see to explore this point of view and to realize where he
He was
was.
sharing his vulnerabilities, like he was sharing where he was coming from.
Yeah, when people are angry, all they're doing is sharing their vulnerability. They're not doing anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. So how he chose to react to that was, okay, I hear you. And is that what is making you angry about this? And what I'm thinking was really that's how he reciprocated was, yes, this is how it is making me angry. And then he's actually answering his questions instead of saying, you know what, get lost. And then just not listening to him. He could have dismissed his questions or counter questions entirely and just
Can you just repeat that? Like,
did my voice break down?
yeah.
Okay. So what happened was Rosenberg was saying something and he said, oh, you're a terrorist or you're an American, whatever, assassin, murderer. And then he said, is the fact that I'm American and is the fact that the tear gas that was thrown at you was of American origin, is that what is bothering you? Trying to engage with, see where he was coming from, where his vulnerabilities were coming from, and sort of trying to engage with that. And then he responds to that. But that was interesting to me that he did in fact respond to that, that he did not sort of disregard that question
Stay
and
silent.
continue calling him a murderer or an assassin, and just sort of, because had he done that, that sort of entire framework would have broken down. It could not have carried. That's what was my skepticism was, okay, it all sounds nice and rosy in theory.
Hunky dory.
Exactly. But when people are mad at each other in, let alone a conflict situation, even in a work environment, if things are like, deadlines are there, you need to, what, finances are tight and people are getting pissed off at each other. And in that moment, you try to use this framework, it can be very easy for communication to just break down. But it did not in this case. And that was very interesting to me. And I was thinking, maybe is this a good representation, or maybe is he cherry picking cases where it did in fact work, as opposed to, maybe other situations also where it did not work? What do you think? Hello?
um, I, 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 I kind of got only the first part, but I'll try. In the
So I said that, do you
in
think he was
terms of
maybe
what
cherry picking?
situations that we are placed in. Sorry.
I was saying that, do you think he was just cherry picking situations where it did in fact work, and maybe there might have been other situations where it did not work and the conversation just broke down, and this sort of maybe like it was because this shows the framework in a positive light. Maybe was he just cherry picking this situation where it did in fact work, and there might have been other situations where it did not work? Or do you think no, this can actually work in most situations?
I think because I don't think there's a conflict between his cherry picking and the effectivity of it, because the from his point of view, he's trying to sell a book. He's trying to sell a book, but he's trying to do a good thing selling a book.
He's
He's
trying
trying
to he's
to,
trying to sell a framework in a broader
yeah,
sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
an idea that he had, and he thought, he's a psychologist, so he's seen so many of his patients going through the same problems, and he thought he'd devise a technique to solve that. Whether the story is even real or not, that I don't think that matters, because obviously we believe it more if it's real. It'll be more embedded in our consciousness if we think it's real. But that's like most things. Um, I can make up a fictional story of I can make up a story of a prince going south and saving a queen, and I can believe it's real, and it can make a change for me, you know. So it can make that change for me. That's the power of narrative, and by putting himself in the first person point of view, he's making it immediate to the viewer, to the reader, and what ultimately he's saying is that cool, you can be a hero too. It goes back to that there's this that there's this iconic symbol that humans tend to create amongst themselves, perfect beings. It's not that he's perfect, right? But but creating what he's doing is creating a ladder to perfection for himself and for the people who are reading it. I think that is very generous, and I feel grateful that there are people like that who can share stories that uplift humanity, rather than the other way around. You know, sure, there's always the other side of things, but I think there's more benefit in uplifting humanity. Otherwise, we don't. Hey, you're back. You're muted.
I am I am recording. Okay. Was it my network or was it the? I thought maybe the call had. Maybe never mind. We're back.
It could be anything really. There's internet. It's the internet.
So yeah, I see your point, but I think so. From what I conclude of it is, it's I don't see it. I see it as sort of one of the tools in the repertoire to be used in conjunction with your common sense and judgment, and use it as a sort of a guiding force and framework that needs to be fine tuned to be applied from one situation to another, as opposed to thinking of it as a magic bullet. That, oh, now this I have found the elixir of all interpersonal relationships.
I think what you're saying requires a lot of, at least for me, it's required a lot of self-reflection and meditation.
Mhm.
I recently read Marcus Aurelius and his Stoic philosophy,
Yeah.
and what he says is philosophy, as is as is what's his name, Socrates in the Republic. These are all philosophies of ideal worlds, but how can we integrate the positive aspects of these into a way that really benefits us?
Mm.
And what people and the truth that there is no easy path, but one path that can be considered most effective because it's more focused is to meditate on the words and bring it to such a level where those words disappear and they are replaced by visuals. So all you see are visuals now. And those visuals are forming a narrative. The narrative of the visuals is uh, so your senses are getting aroused. So you might be getting very angry when you see those visuals.
Yes.
But what's actually happening is you are reaching that deep place within you, which
Yeah.
is the only place that can actually effectively change your outlook in real life, not just superficially, not just an intellectual level.
Yeah. But on an
Because
emotional level.
that's one thing I keep hearing. That's one thing I keep hearing from people who are from different countries and who have a spiritual inclination, is that they are able to clearly see the difference between how Western ideology is very much intellectual, and one can say like at least they say that yeah, I mean it actually is completely subjective, but I feel that we need to really integrate it without actually letting it remain on the surface.
Yeah.
We
So I
cannot
was
be
talking.
oil. It cannot be oil.
Yeah. So there's understanding is, it exists on different levels. There are multiple levels. So there's an intellectual understanding, which means, okay, I see how it works. I see, okay, this idea of maybe whatever emptiness or whatever, all these concepts. It is very easy to see how it works through maybe uh, giving examples of, for example, say, Ship of Theseus. That's a very
Yeah.
often quoted example, right? So I won't get into it in the detail, but you can intellectually understand one idea or the other, but maybe it doesn't percolate into your emotional understanding or a subconscious understanding, or the understanding which affects the way you look at the world, which comes from maybe staying with it and marinating with it and sort of meditating on it, and which is what how it starts to change something within you physically, change how you look at the world, not just how you think, how you understand it to exist, but also how you interact with it, how you feel that it exists from the inside. I see your point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like when I feel that the more connected I am to my own self. So what I try to do is I try to always maintain and this feeling of that I am talking to myself first. I'm talking to myself purely. This conversation is purely like me reflecting on my own thoughts, and whatever's coming from the outside are also my thoughts. In that way, I break down the boundary between. I try to do that. It's not that we're always successful,
Okay.
but when the environment is conducive, it's easier. When the environment is more aggressive, it is slightly difficult, but it is possible. And when we do that, what the good and the bad, like this duality of things, the broad line between that kind of breaks, because suddenly it's there is no you and me, right? It's just one entity talking to itself. And if someone
Mhm.
200 years later were to stumble upon this video, they would see it that way. they
Yeah.
wouldn't they wouldn't they wouldn't say I exist in that video, because
Mhm.
these are a completely different entity. The video has become the entity rather than the people. So although it's made up of its constituent parts, there are two people there, but in general, it's a video. In the same way, even though our mind is made up of its parts, it is it is actually just mind, but it's also but the minute we just say it's just mind, we have to at some level negate it, because um, because that is not the truth. So we keep negating as we do in emptiness, um, to try and come to some sort of root. But it's the ship of Theseus, like you
Yeah.
said. It's the ship of Theseus. The ship might be broken apart, but can we still label it as the ship of Theseus or not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Um, that's the point that you raised about labeling things as good or bad. I want to tie that to something, Rosenberg also says of judgment and making a distinction between value judgment versus moralistic judgment. How he says it is, I mean, it's in making value judgments is inevitable. You have to make value judgments, but it is important to make a distinction between value judgments and moralistic judgments. I'll give one example of how he says violence is bad. And this is very easy to slip with because everyone would say violence is bad. To the extent that it can also almost be considered a universal truth. But if you really break it down, can you hear me? Hello? God, this internet.
Bhanu, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
I think my
Can you hear
internet
me?
is
So yours?
like something has happened. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hello. You're muted. You're muted.
I was wondering if it was your internet or mine.
I think it might be mine, or it could be just the internet. I don't know what's happening.
No,
Like it'd be difficult to say.
we're back on. So yeah, I was saying that he talks about the difference between value judgment and moralistic judgment. And the example that he was saying is violence is bad. And violence is bad is a statement that is now everyone sort of accepts almost as a universal, one of those cliche type things. But he says instead of saying violence is bad, where you are attaching a moralistic judgment to violence, and so from which other judgments also follow, saying that, oh, violence is bad and he committed violence, therefore he must be a bad person. Instead of saying violence is bad, you would say, oh, I am fearful of violence as a means of conflict resolution, and I value other means of resolution as opposed to violence because of their merits or whatever, demerits. So that's a very important distinction to draw, that now suddenly you've removed this attachment of, okay, observation and evaluation of, okay, violence as an, is a bad or an immoral thing, as opposed to violence is causing damage, therefore we should not do it. Which sound very closely related, but there's a very nuanced difference.
Yeah, violence as a damaging thing is definitely more compassionate. It's not coming from a sense of self, but violence is a bad thing. It's coming from a sense of identity.
So it's easy, it ends up being easier. Now, violence is maybe, so it ends up being easier to separate the person from the action of the person, is what I feel. Which is also, if you really think about it, it makes sense. So nothing about this is sort of very,
it's
out of ordinary, but it's just stuff that is so commonplace that you don't see it.
The answer is so simple.
Yeah.
Right. But because it's so
right
simple.
There. It's right there.
Yeah.
Since it is always there, you just don't see it.
Yeah. It's like when we receive these negative emotions, it depends on how we choose to receive it, right? It's what like you said, what are my needs and expectations in that moment. So it's just that when the other person is saying something, considering that we are looking at it conventionally, that there is another person. From the conventional point of view, there is a you and me. So if you're looking at it in that way, the other person always just provides a stimulus for some of the seeds in you that are already within you to bloom. Um, so they're not the cause of it. The cause is within you.
Mm,
They are just the stimulus. They are just the water. You are
mm,
the seed.
mm.
Um, so I think there are different ways of receiving that that would be beneficial. And okay, I mean, the first way is we tend to just when someone comes at me and they accuse me, uh, hey man, what you're not doing a good job, or hey, you're not you're not you're not you're not a loving person, you're not a kind person, or you're a terrible person, or you're not there for me. The first thing that I feel is that, am I really such a bad person? Am I really so worthless in this world that I tend to blame myself, and that makes me feel really sad and depressed, and it makes me withdraw. But then also sometimes, I mean, that used to happen to me earlier in my life,
Yeah.
but then later, what happened is that I was being bullied, but now I began to be the bully. So I was now blaming others. I was getting angry when they said such things to me. And um, I felt that I was gaining retribution. I was getting vengeance, and I was paying them back for all the harm they did me. And then later, I started realizing that my what are my needs, and my what am I actually feeling that I'm trying to hide with this act of anger.
Mhm.
And I realized that there's just this need for acceptance and love and appreciation and company and people who don't want to harm me, and not feeling like people are always harming me. So I recognized that, and then I began to tell them about it.
Yeah.
I began to say, hey, okay, what you're saying to me, I really don't like what you said to me, because it makes me feel like like I am nothing. So that's then I conveyed that um, to my best friend actually at that point, because he was a friend who was constantly judging and analyzing and critical. So I said, hey man, that really hurts. Um, and then after that, and not only with him, with other people, I began to recognize that this what I'm feeling, or what I used to feel, is actually in them as well. Like
Mhm.
they are by expressing themselves in that way, they are vulnerable, and and it's the same as what I was feeling. So when I recognized that, I could be like, okay, like I wasn't affected anymore, and now I was just like just helping them clear it out. So even if I might get stung in the process, I'm still working for their benefit, and I'm not blaming them at all. So oftentimes this comes down to um, like how Rosenberg puts it, it's how we communicate. He likes to focus on words. He likes to focus on how we can first change our speech, um, how we change our speech to then change our action and then our mind. But for me personally, my experience of it was that it started from, obviously I went through everything, but I felt that my mind began to recognize this first, and it's still working on it. It's still working on the speech. It's still working on being a kinder person, and being more vulnerable about their vulnerability. Being vulnerable about their vulnerability, I think. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay, that's all the points I had that I wanted to discuss. Do you have anything that you want to discuss, or should we wrap it up? Been more than
I think this is a like a good hour
good
we've
podcast.
spoken,
Yeah,
and I think that's a great amount
yeah.
of material
Let's
for
keep
to put
something for
together.
things. Yeah, yeah,
I'm sure there's a lot. Yeah,
yeah. All right.
but it was great speaking to you, man.
Likewise, I shall
Yeah.
stop recording now.